What if I told you that everything you are right now, your house, your food, your ability to survive winter, even the size of your brain, exists because one ancient human, over 1 million years ago, did something no animal on Earth had ever dared to do before? They didn't build fire. They didn't invent it. They found it. A lightning strike. A smoldering branch. A spark that should have died out in seconds, like every spark before it had for 4 billion years of life on this planet. But this time, someone didn't run from it. So how did that moment actually happen? How do you go from being terrified of fire, because every instinct in your body screams that fire means death, to walking toward it, picking it up, and carrying it into your camp? And once they had it in their hands, what did they even do with it? How did a burning stick turn into cooked meat, warm nights, sharper weapons, and eventually, everything we call civilization? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why some scientists don't think fire was just something humans discovered. They think it might be the single thing that made us human at all. Let's go back. Not thousands of years, millions. Before controlled fire, our ancestors lived exactly like every other animal on the savannah. When the sun went down, it got cold and it got dark, and both of those things were dangerous. Predators with better night vision owned the darkness completely. Raw food was harder to digest, packed with parasites, and offered far less energy than it looked like it should. And there was nothing standing between an early human and the elements except body fat, thin fur, and pure luck. Fire already existed in the world, of course. It had existed for hundreds of millions of years, born from lightning strikes, volcanic activity, and spontaneous combustion in dry grasslands during the hot season. Every animal on Earth had seen wildfire before, and every single one of them had learned the exact same lesson, generation after generation. When you see fire, you run. So the real mystery here isn't, how did fire appear? Fire had always been around. The real mystery is this: how did one species look at the exact thing every other species on the planet fled from, and decide to walk toward it instead? Here's what the physical evidence actually tells us. Archaeologists working at Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa uncovered burned bone fragments and ash deposits dating back roughly 1 million years. Among the earliest strong evidence, we have a fire being used inside a controlled, sheltered space rather than just encountered out in the open. At Zhoukoudian in China, researchers found layered ash deposits, burned bone, and charred seeds dated to around 400,000 years ago, suggesting fire there wasn't just tolerated for a single afternoon. It was maintained, over and over, in the same spot. Notice that word, maintained. That's the real turning point in this story, and it's the part most people skip past. The discovery of fire wasn't the moment someone got warm for an afternoon and then let it die. It was the moment someone realized fire could be kept alive, and that keeping it alive was worth the effort. Because here's something most people don't think about. Early humans almost certainly could not create fire from scratch for an enormous stretch of their history. Friction-based fire starting, spinning a wooden drill fast enough against a wooden base, or striking sparks from stone, takes real technique, strength, and patience even today. Try it yourself sometime. It's exhausting, your hands blister, and it doesn't always work even when you know exactly what you're doing. So for a huge span of human history, the answer to, how did they get fire? Wasn't invention at all. It was capture. They watched the sky for lightning strikes. They learned which regions saw wildfires sweep through on a seasonal rhythm, almost like clockwork. And when a fire started nearby, one they hadn't caused and couldn't have caused, they didn't scatter with the rest of the animal kingdom. Someone approached the edge of the burn, found a smoldering branch or a bed of hot coals, and carried it home. That single act, carrying fire instead of fleeing from it, is one of the most quietly radical decisions in the entire history of life on Earth. It meant overriding a survival instinct that had kept every single ancestor alive for millions of years before them. And the moment it was done, it created a brand new problem nobody had ever faced before. How do you keep something like that alive? A carried ember doesn't last long on its own. It needs fuel, it needs airflow, and it needs constant attention. This is very likely where one of the first real divisions of labor in human history emerges. Someone, or some rotating group of someones, whose entire responsibility was this one job: don't let the fire go out, because if it went out, the group might not get another chance for weeks or months. There was no lighter in anyone's pocket. There was no backup plan. This is also where we start finding something remarkable buried in the archaeological record: fire that stays in one place over and over. Hearths. Actual repeated use fire pits, found in layer after layer at certain sites, meaning the exact same location was used to keep fire going for generations, sometimes centuries. A hearth isn't just a fire, it's infrastructure. It's arguably the first hint in the archaeological record of something that looks like a home, eventually, and researchers still debate exactly when, with estimates ranging from around 400,000 years ago to possibly earlier for some hominid populations. Humans figured out how to create fire on demand instead of waiting for it. Striking certain minerals, like pyrite against flint, could throw a spark hot enough to catch dry tinder if you knew the angle. Friction methods using a wooden hand drill or bow drill, spun fast enough or long enough, could build up heat through pure sustained effort until an ember formed. Once that leap happened, fire stopped being something you waited for. It became something you made. That single shift, from capturing fire to creating it on command, may be one of the most underrated turning points in the entire human story. It meant a group was no longer tied to luck or geography. They weren't waiting around for lightning to strike nearby. They could move into new, unfamiliar territory, colder climates, darker forests, mountain regions no one had ever settled in before, and bring the one tool that made all of it survivable along with them, in a pouch, on their back. Some researchers point to something else too. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, show a startling calmness around low-intensity wildfire in certain regions, almost as if the instinct to flee fire entirely isn't quite as universal as we assume. It's a clue, not proof, but it hints that the ability to tolerate fire at close range might have been sitting inside our lineage for a very long time before anyone actually captured a flame. But discovering fire, and keeping fire alive, was really only step one of this story. The part that actually rewired what humans were capable of came from what they started doing with it once they had it. The most important use of fire almost certainly wasn't warmth. It was food. Raw meat and raw plants are hard to digest. Chewing and processing raw food takes enormous amounts of energy, and your gut has to work overtime just to extract whatever nutrition it can pull out. Cooking changes that entire equation. Heat breaks down tough fibers and proteins before they ever reach your stomach, meaning your body spends far less energy on digestion and absorbs far more calories from the exact same amount of food. Primatologist Richard Wrangham built an entire, widely discussed theory around this idea, that cooking food didn't just make life more comfortable, it may have freed up enough metabolic energy to fuel the growth of the human brain itself. Our brains are extraordinarily expensive organs to run, burning a huge share of our daily calories, just idling in the background. Some researchers argue that without the extra digestible energy cooking provided, the human brain as we know it might never have had the fuel to grow at all. Ask yourself this: if that theory is right, then the brain you're using to watch this video right now might only exist because one ancient human, standing over a fire, decided to hold a piece of meat over the flame instead of eating it raw. Beyond food, fire meant light, and light meant time. Before fire, the day ended the moment the sun went down. Every waking hour after dark was simply lost, spent huddled in darkness, vulnerable and idle. Fire extended the human day for the first time in the history of the species. It gave communities hours in the evening to make tools, repair equipment, teach children, and most importantly, talk. Some anthropologists believe the fireside gathering may be one of the earliest settings for storytelling and complex language to flourish, because for the first time ever, people had structured time together at the end of the day, with nothing else demanding their attention. Fire was also a weapon against the dark in a much more literal sense: protection. Large predators that would otherwise stalk a sleeping camp generally avoid fire, and its smoke instinctively. A burning perimeter meant a group could actually sleep through the night, without a rotating shift fighting off attacks in total darkness. That alone may have saved more lives across human history than any weapon that was ever built. And fire reshaped technology itself directly. Heat hardening the tips of wooden spears in the coals made them significantly stronger and far more lethal for hunting, a technique found in multiple prehistoric sites across different continents, developed independently. Later, controlled fire became essential for working with entirely new materials like clay and, eventually, metal. You cannot fire pottery, or smelt, or without sustained, carefully controlled heat. Every forge, every kiln, every furnace humanity has ever built is a direct descendant of that first captured ember, thousands of generations removed. Fire also became a tool for preserving food, not just cooking it. Meat and fish held over smoke for extended periods lose moisture and gain natural preservatives from the smoke itself, allowing a successful hunt to feed a group for weeks instead of days. In a world with no refrigeration whatsoever, that single trick, smoking meat over a slow fire, may have been the difference between feast and famine and something closer to actual food security. Even the landscape itself bent to fire. There's growing archaeological and ecological evidence that early humans used controlled, deliberate burning to clear overgrown land, encourage fresh plant growth that attracted grazing animals, and manage territory in ways that reshaped entire ecosystems, long before agriculture existed in any form. In parts of Australia, evidence suggests Aboriginal peoples were using controlled, fire stick farming for tens of thousands of years to actively manage the land they lived on. So when you add it all up, better nutrition, more energy potentially fueling brain growth, extended daylight hours, real protection from predators, stronger tools, preserved food supplies, and the ability to reshape the very land they lived on, fire wasn't just one invention among many in human history. It was the foundation everything else got built on top of. And that raises an uncomfortable question worth sitting with for a second. If one species, at some forgotten moment a million years ago, hadn't overridden its own survival instinct, hadn't walked toward the flame instead of away from it like every other animal before it, would anything we call civilization exist at all? There's one more use of fire that rarely gets mentioned, and it might be the biggest one of all. Fire is what let humans leave Africa. Humans evolved in warm climates. Our bodies are built for heat, not cold. Thin skin, sparse fur compared to other mammals. No natural insulation to speak of. Without fire, our ancestors were essentially locked into a narrow band of warm, hospitable territory, the same way most tropical species are today. Cold regions weren't just uncomfortable. They were lethal, full stop. Fire broke that barrier. With a reliable source of heat that could be carried and rebuilt anywhere, humans could survive nights in places that would otherwise have killed them within hours. Some researchers directly connect the timing of controlled fire use with the timing of early human migration into colder parts of Europe and Asia. Without fire, there's a real argument that humans might have stayed confined to Africa's warmer regions for a lot longer than we did, and the entire map of human history might look completely different today. Fire also became something bigger than survival. Once it moved to the center of daily life, it moved to the center of meaning. Across nearly every ancient culture we have any record of, fire shows up wrapped in ritual and symbolism, something to be respected, sometimes worshipped, often treated as almost alive. Ancient hearths weren't just cooking spots. Archaeological sites show fires positioned at the literal center of shelters and gathering spaces, night after night, generation after generation, the physical center of the group, and quite possibly the emotional one too. And in a callback worth remembering, fire wasn't only used to prepare food and light the dark. Heated stone or the flat of a blade, pressed against a wound, could cauterize it closed when nothing else could stop the bleeding. The same discovery that cooked dinner and lit the night could also, on the worst days, be the only thing standing between a person and a wound that wouldn't stop. So the next time you light a candle, flip on a stove, or sit around a campfire with friends, remember what you're actually holding. It's not just heat. It's the single tool that let a hairless, clawless, relatively slow animal walk out of Africa, survive the cold, cook its food, light its nights, and eventually build absolutely everything else that followed. One ember. That's where all of this started. And everything since has just been us, still tending the same fire, one generation at a time.